talking, Megan, so you can keep testing.
Speaking of Ferris Bueller, I'm actually in Chicago right now.
Oh, well, catch
Wow.
a baseball for me.
I'm leaving the Field Museum as we speak.
Oh, very cool.
I'm going down in the garage, so I might lose you guys, but I'll hop
Okay,
back on.
thanks for getting everything fixed. We had a little delay here with our technology. As you know from Steve Cross's email tonight, we've changed things up a little bit. We're going to go back to our live streaming, and that's why you see the full city council and myself on the Zoom. And those of you that want to Zoom can do that, as you can see. But those of you in the room do not need to worry about microphones and which one to use and all that sort of thing, because with the technology that Julian has enabled, you will be able to hear everyone zooming in from the speaker that's at his table. And so we'll go back to our old, that means we go back to our old way of when you want to talk, you press the button on the microphone, and that we've always used before all this started, and we will be able to hear you here. And I'm assuming those of you Zooming can hear me. Is that correct, Joe, Lauren? Okay, excellent. And we are recording it. So with all of that in mind, any questions before we start? Yes. Just like normal. Yep. Yeah, we don't all get to talk at once. That does not change that rule. So, all right. With that in mind, I'd like to call to order the work session for the City Council for the City of Wildwood for Monday, March 22nd, 2021. Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Bullen.
Here.
Councilmember Garitano.
Here.
Councilmember Garitano.
I'm here.
Councilmember Flasher.
Here.
Councilmember Jaxie.
Here.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Here.
Councilmember Nyan. Here. Councilmember Bartoni. Councilmember Bros.
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Remy. Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
He went away. Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember McCune.
Here.
Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Here.
All right, excellent. Thank you and welcome everyone. Appreciate you being here. I had a request to change the agenda to handle the items that are listed after strategic planning, which would be the increased contract authorization for the Evergreen Forest curb replacement and the pedestrian bridge. And if there's no objection, and then we would go to strategic planning. If there's no objection, I'm fine with that, subject to seeing how the discussion on those goes in terms of length. If we start getting into a lot of debate and it's going to look like it'll eat up our time for strategic planning, I'd like the ability to move back into strategic planning. So is there any objection if we start with the items under B and C and then go back to strategic planning once we get those handled? All right, seeing no objection, the first item, and actually before we get to that, my apology, we have 5 items under information. Before we do action items, is there anything under information that any member of the council would like to speak on or about which you may have a question? Okay, all right. So going into the action items, we will alter the agenda and start with the request for increased contract authorization for the Evergreen Forest curb replacement. Joe, do you or Rick want to speak to that?
Mr. Mayor, I think I'll be speaking to it.
Okay.
I'll do my best to keep it brief if that's okay.
That's definitely okay.
This request is relative to the Ordinance 2596, which was passed by the council last month. That ordinance authorized a city contractor agreement with a Foster's Concrete Construction. That project that they are authorized to do is replacement of the curbs in the subdivision. The contract amount is just over $47,000 per the ordinance, which is just enough to replace about 1/2 of the total concrete curbs in the subdivision. Just to give you an idea, we originally estimated about $150,000 was the cost to replace all the curbs. So with our reduced budget in 2021, we were only able to budget $75,000 for the work, which we expected to be about half the subdivision curbs. But now, since the bids came in low, well below our budgeted amount of $75,000, the HOA is asking if we could increase the contractor's authorization for work, essentially up to the maximum $75,000. In addition, I do need to point out that we actually have another $16,150 available for use, as when we took over the subdivision streets in 2018, the subdivision wrote us a nice check of $16,150 that was to be used on future curb work. So we have that available as well. So the recommendation from the department is to increase the contract authorization under Ordinance 2596 up to the amount of $91,150, which includes the $16,150 escrow monies from the subdivision HOA. And with that increase, we think we can replace all of the curbs in the subdivision this year. So we'll be in and out in 1 year. We have talked to the contractor and they are agreeable with this approach. So the department is asking for a motion tonight from the council. And if we get a favorable motion, we'll bring back the legislation to amend the contract amount up to $91,150. So that is the request, and I'm available for any questions from the council.
Okay, so to clarify, the motion would be to have legislation prepared to amend the prior ordinance passed by the council, essentially through increasing the amount and the scope of the work. Is that correct, Rick?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to that effect made by Councilmember McCutcheon, seconded by Councilmember Bertolino? Is there any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Clark?
I just want to be clear on this, that we are doubling what we cut it down to because of the need to decrease our budget this year. Now we're doubling that. Is that what we're doing?
No.
We are proposing to do all the work this year, but we can keep the work within our $75,000 budget that we have for 2021 if we account for the $16,150 of escrowed monies that the subdivision provided us.
So the work would be within them.
Okay, thank you.
She's good.
Understood.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Thank you for the question. Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And Councilmember Edens, I think you were muted there. Did you?
I did unmute, but apparently there is a delay for those of us on Zoom.
Okay.
So we'll need a little bit more of a long pause, I think, for it to come through tonight.
Okay,
So
all
we'll
right.
be
So
the
you
sticks
were-
in the mud, but I'm a yes.
Okay. All right. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Motion carries. That takes us to the next item, which is bids for the proposed pedestrian bridge. Who wants to handle that, Rick or Joe?
Mr. Mayor, that'll be me.
Okay, go
Mr.
ahead.
Mayor, excuse me. Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, the Planning and Parks Committee at its March 16th, 2021 meeting was presented the results of a bidding process for a small pedestrian bridge that would be constructed between the manors at the Meadows of Cherry Hills and the enclaves at Cherry Hills. When both of these residential subdivisions were developed, the city's public space requirements set forth the installation of trails on either side of this small drainage way that defines the boundary between the two. The drainage way created a barrier. That barrier needs to be broached, and by building this pedestrian bridge, we can link these two subdivisions together and the pedestrian networks associated with each of them, as well as Manchester Road. The bridging project, from the perspective of the committee, was successful. 7 companies responded. 2 of those companies were very close in their bidding, and more importantly, both of those companies were below the budgeted amount of $111,000. I would note that the $11,000 is the amount that McBride & Son homes contributed to this project besides building the segment of trail in the manors at the meadows of Cherry Hills. The committee members considered the recommendation of the Department of Planning and Parks and is tonight presenting to the City Council the selection of DJM Ecological Services for this $100,000+ project. The project is inclusive of the trail, landscaping, and bridge. It is important to note that DJM Ecological Services has done work within the city of Wildwood and is a known quantity, is a local company here with offices in the St. Louis region, and their specialty is low impact development and native plantings and other items, which would be consistent with what we like to see in terms of the area around the pedestrian bridge. Finally, the committee would note that this isn't the lowest bid. It is approximately $2,300 greater than the one from Spalding Contractors or Constructors, excuse me. But again, those factors that were just described relative to DJM Ecological Services justified the additional $2,000+. Tonight, the Planning and Parks Committee is respectfully requesting the authorization to prepare the legislation for the contract for this service. If there are any questions, members of the committee or the Department of Planning and Parks would be glad to answer them at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Councilmember Garitano.
Yeah, I'd be happy to make a motion to proceed with this.
Okay, we have a motion from Councilmember Garitano to proceed with the drafting of legislation as suggested by the Department of Planning. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Galani. Discussion on the motion, Councilmember McCune.
Joe, I have one question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
The requirement for the sod versus the seed and straw, how much of that is going to cost the city, and who would maintain to make sure the sod doesn't die? Because I don't think we have irrigation.
Councilmember McCune, we did not choose at alternate 3 because of this, the exact fact that you just mentioned. With sod, it has to be watered regularly, and that's not something that I would necessarily want the city to have to do on a day-to-day basis. And so therefore we're doing seed and straw, which we hope can occur at the latter stages of the project in fall, so we have some success with it as well.
Yeah, because I was reading in the agreement, it says, and then sod versus seed and straw in the bid proposal.
Yes,
So-
we did. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So you are going with the alternative then, just for clarification?
We are just going with seed and straw, not sod.
Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Councilor McCutcheon, did I see your hand?
I was just going to second.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion on the motion for the drafting of legislation to affect the recommendation of the department? Councilmember Brost.
Yeah, I'm just questioning in the process of the priorities. Should this be treated? I mean, does it need to be addressed before we finalize our priorities? Does everyone place this as a very high priority that would get approved tonight versus all the other items on the list? And it just seems like, again, I get back to, we got to get our priorities set and then prioritize. So I just, it's a question does everyone, I mean, I guess maybe let me know if you feel this should move ahead of everything else on the list. I mean, I think what we're doing is very important on the priorities, and is this going to be number 1? And that's why we're required to do it tonight.
Councilor Dodwell.
Joe, is this coming, I have a question for you, Mr. Vunich. Is this coming from funds that are currently budgeted or from a prior year that have been budgeted for this project?
Yes, Ms. Dodwell. As part of the 2020 discussion of fiscal year 2021 capital improvements program, this was one of the few projects that was retained by the Department of Planning and Parks. It is also supplemented again by developer dedicated funds, the $11,000 from McBride and Son Homes.
So to answer the question, does that mean it's included in the budget at the moment? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It is in the budget at this time.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Just a
Councilor
quick
Gerton.
comment. Yeah, this proposal was approved by the city council in January of 2015. At the time, as part of the site development plan with the manors at Cherry Hills. So it's been on the list since 2015. And I know folks have been asking for it over the years, over and over, and every year we keep pushing it out. So that's why we're trying to get this one done.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rose.
So Joe, are you saying this is the most important item under Public Works? Because, I understand budgeting, but we're going through this priority process. And I just think we have to be true to the results, because the results are, essentially a consensus of everyone. So I'm just not following the logic. I mean, internet's been discussed for, over 10 years. There's other projects, but as a council, are we saying we need to move forward with this because it's urgent and it's the highest item on the list? It's not rated as such, but is that what we're saying now? Because this, to me, and I guess the reason I'm making this point is that this is a minor item. We're going to have some heavy thinking to do if we're really going to adjust the city's lifestyle to follow the priorities that we set. Because we can't reprioritize every time we have a council session and an item comes up and it says, well, we've talked about it since 2015. If it's number one, if it's a high priority, then yes. So I think we're going to have some tough decisions to make. And by, I think, approving this tonight, we're saying it is like extremely important and we have to act now versus a point where we wait until we finalize all our priorities. Because we're cutting something else out by doing this now. Our funds are limited. So and I don't have all the answers, but that's the thought process that's happening.
Councilor Bertolino.
Yeah, Larry, I appreciate your sentiments, and I keep coming back to that too, is why are we doing the strategic planning if we've got things that we're spending money on that ended up fairly low on the priority list? My answer to myself on this is that we've made commitments to HOAs, individual homeowners, and so on over the past few years that have said we were going to commit money to fix this problem or whatever. I think it's inappropriate for us to go back now and say, well, we've done a strategic plan now and we've rethought this, and no, we're not going to fix that bridge or do those curbs or whatever. I think that would send a terrible message to those homeowners and those associations that we have made some commitments to.
Okay. Councilor Rose.
Dave, I agree. I think if we have commitments outstanding, then maybe that should be another category on this priority list that says these are things that the city is already committed to. So like, for example, when we go down the path on internet and we've signed a contract with someone, that's a commitment. And I totally agree that we should honor our commitments. So if we have outstanding commitments as a city, or maybe they're more promises, or I don't know if it's an actual contract, but that should probably be duly noted for all of us to know about. So I don't know if that's a list that could get prepared at some point. So
I think relative to our strategic planning, just to try to find some consensus in the discussion I'm hearing, that it may be helpful if we, and this would be for Steve Cross and Rick principally, and possibly Joe, any project that may not be identified on our strategic plan for which we have contractually or otherwise similarly committed ourselves, probably ought to be potentially, well, I'd say potentially included on that list, but at least made available so that the council has an understanding of that when these things come up and the concerns expressed tonight might be alleviated in advance. Can we get that? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to get that. Councilmember McCutcheon?
No, I'd just like to add that, yes, we have to be cognizant of where funding is coming from. A grant would move that project up just a little bit. And maybe all our ducks in a row for another project that may where the funding comes from. So this list, while it's important and we're setting priorities, it's also a little fluid.
The list can be modified as needed. Yes. Yep.
We do have the funding. That is part of this. That is part of that.
Right. But I think her point is that when that funding comes in could potentially alter the time frame and so forth. Just so it's somewhat fluid, but we're doing our best with it. So, okay. See no further discussion. The motion on the floor is to have legislation prepared to affect the recommendation of the Department of Planning. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 And there was delay for those of you who are on Zoom. Thank you. All right. Is there any opposed? Is there any abstentions? Are there any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion carries. And that legislation will be presented to the council probably at its next meeting. Okay. So now we're going to, I tell you what, let's go ahead and get our receipt and file out of the way. Joe, since you are at the mic, so to speak, if there's no objection, do you want to say anything about the receipt and file that's before the council this evening?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, very briefly, the Planning and Zoning Commission considered the engineered drawings for the Manchester Road shared use path over the course of the last 6 weeks. The matter was being presented in conjunction with the Department of Public Works and the Department of Planning and Parks. There were concerns voiced about the cost of this particular project, but again, from the perspective of the departments and in the case of the Planning and Zoning Commission, they noted that over 50% of the project is to be compensated by a federal grant that the Department of Public Works in the city of Wildwood was awarded. The report from the Planning and Zoning Commission identifies certain concerns that were raised by the Planning and Zoning Commission beyond the cost, and those were addressed, I believe, to their satisfaction. And ultimately, the vote was favorable on the site development plan, and it is being presented tonight for receipt and filing by the City Council. If there are any questions, Mr. Brown and myself are available to address them. Thank you.
So, Joe, I'm trying to find out from the city attorney or you, I guess now, why is this here other than informational? Why is this here before the council? What are the council's options if it wanted to do anything with this?
It's more of an informational item, so you're aware that the process has been completed and the code requirements relative to projects in the Wildwood has been adhered to by our own city itself.
Okay. So it's just informational. Okay. All right. Thank you. And so that takes us back to strategic planning. We have a couple of things I was hopeful that we could get through this evening. And the first is after our last work session planning on strategic planning session on this, I asked Steve Cross to work with our city team to develop, this kind of takes us into phase 3, the last of the 3 phases, but just so we can keep the process going, and identify as to the sub goals that all of you have developed up to this point, and those may change, but as where we sit today, to identify who's responsible for those, when they are expected to be done, And ultimately, we're going to have a checkbox as to whether that is accomplished. And so I know that Steve forwarded that list to you last week. And so before we get into the other more substantive item of strategic planning concerning Lake Chesterfield, I thought I would see if everyone has had a chance to look at that that document that Steve sent, and specifically if you have any changes or questions about that. Again, we'll do a final approval on this, but just to keep the progress moving forward, if no one has any suggested changes, then we will consider that those additional columns and the information shown in there as I've described to be the case for this plan. Councilmember Dodwell.
The only real question that I had was the target dates are all within the next 2 years, and this is a 5-year plan. And so are the target dates associated with components within each of these areas, or completion, 100% completion of each of these items on the dates specified here? That's just a pretty aggressive 5-year plan, especially if we've got funding concerns. I mean, I'm looking at improved connectivity for residents who do not have internet access. And there's no funding listed with that at all, really, at this time, because we're still trying to determine what that is. Yet we've got a lot of these other projects that are going to be finished in 21 and 22. And I'm just a little confused on how we can get all those things done so quickly.
Steve Cross, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Dodwell, thank you. We went through each one of these line items, and you will notice that in a lot of cases, there'll be an indication of design in 2021, let's say right away, construction in 23, 24, 25. So there is some of that. But you're absolutely right. Your point is well taken. I think, when we looked at it, probably some of this is perhaps a little aggressive, but I think we wanted to at least put this on there and give us a target to shoot for and get it done sooner rather than later. But those construction projects that we know are going to be, there could be components of it done over the next 5 years. We've identified that. So there's no question that this is going to require some tweaking. This was Joe and Rick and I sat down and we went through these line by line and kind of took our best shot. But I think in an attempt to try to do things that the council wanted, I think maybe we might have been a little aggressive. I think you're probably right.
So to Councilmember Dodwell's point, maybe between, again, this is just FYI at this juncture, and the council will do a final sign off on the strategic plan. But maybe over the course of the next couple of weeks, do you think it would be helpful for you and your team to revisit and just make sure that this is realistic, or are you comfortable that it's realistic?
It never hurts to take another look at it just to make sure. So no, I think that's a good suggestion, and we will do that.
Okay, Councilmember Dodwell.
Could we perhaps bring these timetables to our subcommittee meetings so that we can have the department heads maybe explain how they think they're going to manage their way through all that in that time frame, and make any adjustments there too?
You mean the standing committees?
The standing committees, yes.
I think we can do that.
I think that's a very good suggestion, Ms.
That way you
Dodwell.
guys aren't just racking your brains by yourself.
No, believe me, the more input that we can get from the committees would be great. So I think that's a great suggestion, and we'd like to take advantage of that if we could. Because
we could do that in April. And
yeah, the only caveat I would ask is, and I ask this with all due respect, and that is, if we could have an understanding that if we're going to submit all of these details now to the three subcommittees, that we have the response at the meeting it's presented. And so it doesn't keep going and come back and postponed. And before we know it, we're trying to sit here and finish this, and it's been moved and pinballed around for 60 days or so. So I would just ask if there's agreement, and particularly from the chairs of the three committees, and that would be Councilor McCutcheon, Councilor Edens, and Councilor Garetano. We'll get this information to your committee at its next meeting in April with a report back immediately following that meeting, so that it's a one meeting shot. Can we have that understanding?
Yes, sir.
Joe, are you good with that?
Yes.
Councilor McCutcheon? Councilmember Edens?
Yes.
Excellent. Steve Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we could probably excuse me, doing a couple things concurrently. I'm sorry. Again, you have the list before you that I sent out last week. So if there is something in particular that really stands out that you think might be overly aggressive, please let me know, and we can do that now. At the same time, Joe Vunich, Rick Brown, and I will get together and we'll go through these, and any changes that we see that definitely need to be changed, we'll make the change and get this revised spreadsheet to you as quickly as possible. So we'll do that. And I think we can do that this week. So by the end of the week, I'll commit to having a revised, and there'll probably be some changes. So we can be doing that as well. But by the same token, if there's something that looks aggressive and there's a reason for that, we can add that in the explanation to you all as well as to why we have that. But it would be helpful if if something really, really looks unusual to you, let me know and we'll definitely look at it.
i.e., we don't have to wait till those committee meetings to do it. You can simply, and that would expedite, you can get that information ahead of time to Steve and or the chairs of those committees, and that would expedite those committees' review of that. So, Councilor McCutcheon.
Because when I took a look at it, it was very similar.
And there's going to be components of that plan in this. Now, we've gone a whole lot further than we did before, but yeah, there ought to be some parallels to that original 5-year plan. And again, the items that are budgeted are also part of this process as well. Now, I did make notes, given the earlier conversation, that if there's some items that we have committed to, and I think most of that is identified in here, particularly with the funding issues. Sorry, but there should be some close parallels to what we've done previously. Yes, ma'am.
So in that regard, and I haven't put this before our interim city administrator yet, but to the extent it is possible, I'm assuming it would be possible, I think once the council gets to a point of a definitive strategic plan, and this sort of goes to the discussion we had earlier from Councilmember Bros relative to the bridge, we add a column in our budget that's been approved that has the line item in the strategic plan to which that budget line item corresponds. I was going to wait to put that out there, but since we're already there, we're there. And there may be more than one item, shown in that column on the budget that's reflected in the strategic plan. There may be 2 bridges under that or whatever, but at least that'll be a frame of reference for the council to tie it all together and the public. Any objection to that? Okay. All right. So good discussion on the new columns with due dates. Yep. Councilmember Clark.
Yeah, I just had one question. From the first meeting we had in February, I remembered the spent to date in internet access as 750,000. Is that different, or were we just maybe I misunderstood?
What was that for 750,000?
The internet spent to date.
Internet spent to date?
Yeah, the how much we spent on the internet so far was brought up in the first meeting of February. And I remember the amount being 750,000.
Steve Cross.
Thank you. I'm going to defer to Mr. Vunich because I think the $590,000 may be net of monies that are coming back to the city, but I think Joe has been keeping a running total of this. So if it's okay with
Sure.
you, Mr. Mayor, if Mr. Vunich would speak to that.
Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Clark, what we found is that the estimate I provided was a little higher than it should have been. Roughly speaking, we've spent about $600,000 since we began the installation of poles for wireless internet access service to the rural areas in 2014. So the number's a little lower. We asked the finance manager to check all the expenditures, which he completed. And so the number isn't as bad as I made it out to be.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. Thanks, Joe. Okay, so excellent discussion. At least we've got more of a marching plan than we had, and I think at a minimum this will give just the process of Joe and Rick and Steve of going through it will give some guidance as to how things fall on a timing basis and who's doing what. So it'll help there as well as help all of us. All right. Any other questions before we move to the next item for strategic planning? And before we get to that, I want to just ask something of all of you, what your thoughts are that I thought about this last week relative to the internet access item. And we're not going to get into the funding of that because, as you know, at the last meeting, or the funding discussion, because at the last meeting, we need to get some very definitive details as to the cost and scope and so forth. And Joe, before I get to what I'm going to say, is everything still in line with your absolute unqualified promise to have that to us at the first meeting in February?
We did contact CTC.
In April, I'm sorry. I'm sorry?
We did contact CTC, Technology and Energy. They have developed an item that is under review by Mr. Young, Mr. Cross, and I, and we hope to have that back to them probably tomorrow or Wednesday, and then it'll go out to the providers, and we've asked for a very short turnaround. We will do everything we can to make that happen.
I'm loving that. Yes, I'm hearing again. That's excellent. That's great. Okay. Speaking of rural internet, one of the things I thought about, and again, I don't know if there's a right or wrong here, but, and I've talked about this with some of you, and I wanted to get with more of you before the meeting. I just didn't have the opportunity this last few days. What are your thoughts about changing the name of the Rural Internet Access Committee to Internet Access Committee and striking the rural? It seems to me, first of all, that would be consistent with the directives of the council thus far with its views on internet access, number one. And number two, I think that to the extent the scope of the program ends up involving more than just rural residents, as it is possible that it may, that would also be consistent with, an approach in terms of the marketing of that and so forth. Again, not a right or wrong answer here. I just wanted to see what your thoughts are on that, I guess. Councilmember Dodwell.
Well, under our strategic plan, we only have listed here internet access and improved connectivity for residents that don't currently have it, and then reduce the cost for residents who currently have it. I would tend, until we make final vote on who we're going to go with and how we're going to go, that we leave Rural Internet Access Committee as it is. And once we come down to a final option for us, then perhaps we could make that name change.
Councilor McCune.
I thought we discussed this at the last council meeting because I was agreeing with you that the rural part kind of took out what we were trying to do collectively as a city. And I thought we had an issue by doing that. And I don't know if Mr. Young commented on it, but there was a concern of changing it mid process. So does anybody recollect that conversation?
That's what I said.
I don't recollect that. It may have happened. You don't recollect that? Is
Like-
there an issue
like
with
changing the name?
changing the name of the?
I believe that the issue was more of a appearance issue of everything that we have in terms of notices and information to the public has the Rural Internet Access Committee name on it. So that was the only issue. There's not a legal issue with it, except that also is in terms of appointments, they were appointed that committee, but the city council can certainly take action to change that name.
Yeah, I remember the discussion. I didn't know if we had any uphill battle with it. So I just wanted to recollect that conversation. So,
None legally. Any other thoughts, Councilmember Clark?
Yes, I like that idea because it gives a broader overview of everything that we're looking at. And I even thought about that on the ranking of these strategic plan goals. I know you don't want me to go into the details, and I'm trying to hold back.
I know you are.
On the internet access, I would even change the internet access to internet, and then because we've got some categories there, to put a category of internet access and cost instead of having the broad term as internet access.
Okay, Councilmember Garitano.
Yeah, I would be supportive of changing the name and removing the rural. This is a citywide problem. It's not just a problem for areas that are west or Ward 1 or Ward 6. I've got residents in Ward 8 too that are impacted as well. And I think it also causes confusion because we have the name rural in there. Technically, Wildwood is not considered a rural city. And so whenever a new headline hits the news that says millions of dollars are dedicated towards rural internet access, it causes confusion, and our residents then ask questions, why aren't we getting the money? And so I would agree with taking away the rural part out of it and just make it a citywide issue.
Councilor Flasher, did I see your hand? Okay, pointing to Joe. Councilor Clark, she's from Ward 1, as all of you know, and members of the public, which is one of our more rural wards. Any thoughts specifically from Ward 6 or you, Councilmember Roast, on this, since we would be removing the rural? Councilmember Roast?
Yeah, I think it would be good to remove it. I've heard people over time I've been here saying I got a lot of calls from residents about this. Well, I tell you what, I'm getting a lot of calls from residents, and they're not all Ward 1 and Ward 6. And actually, a phone call I had earlier today, the question specifically was, is this only going to be for people in the rural part of Wildwood? And I said, no, the goal is not to leave anybody behind. So I would support it I don't think it's going to change the path we're on, but it may help the communication side of it.
Okay, Councilmember Rambo.
Yeah, I agree with Larry. I've been, for the last few minutes, trying to think of a catchy acronym that leaves out the R in Internet Access Committee. I'm not coming up with anything that's too snazzy, but I think that would be a great thing to make it just more universal. A Wildwood improvement. There are people that are complaining about property values to me that already have good internet service, et cetera. So I think it makes sense to do it. I would like us to have to sort of make a splash if we do change it. Say the REAC is now citywide for the reasons we just mentioned. We're trying to help everyone and provide ubiquitous broadband service to the entire city. So it makes, I endorse the concept. I think we need to noodle on the name just a little bit.
Councilor McCutcheon.
Yeah, I'm just going to piggyback on what Rob's just said, because that's what's my thought. So if we're going to do that, we need to let residents know what all residents are going to be able to have versus just the rural areas. So a lot of the other areas have internet. So what are they going to reap out of this process?
Councilmember McCune.
A while back when Councilmember Greg Noddy was seated, I think that Larry, you might have been a part of that, was discussing the idea of the rural internet, and we could get some grant funding or something to that effect, that maybe we could get some state funding or federal funding if we were considered rural. I don't know what the results were. I know that we had some conversations with it. I just don't want to, I don't know if we had a dead road and there's no possibilities for that, or was that even an option? So I don't want to take that off the table by removing that name and give up funds that we could possibly have.
At the moment, to the best of my knowledge, after considerable discussion, there are no grants or other governmental grants or funds available. Even if there are, the name of our Rural Internet Committee or Internet Access Committee will not have any bearing on whether we get those funds. What they're going to be looking at would be, how many residents we have that are underserved, what costs they're having to pay, those kinds of things. What we title a committee would be irrelevant to that.
I was just saying the statements that were not rural. So I didn't know what the results were, and I just wanted to make sure I was unclear. So thank you for that clarification.
Councilmember Garitano.
I heard Councilmember Rambo thinking of trying to replace the word rural. So I was going to give a suggestion for him to consider. How about the Broadband Internet Access Committee, and therefore broadband meaning that we will have different options of internet, because it does leave it open for whether we have your existing services or if you take advantage of the new services, which are maybe faster.
My only hesitation with that is, I definitely appreciate the suggestion. I obviously we don't want to change names of committees too often. Does the term broadband, which may now be a term of art, change at some point and start being called something else? I don't know. But anyway, I appreciate that suggestion. We can think about that. Councilmember Galani.
Yeah, I was going to echo the sentiments of the other council members in regards to supporting the removal of rural. I think in the process that we're going through and what we're looking at improving internet access for residents of the city, not in a specific neighborhood per se or anywhere. And so while we do have strategic targets for folks that don't currently have internet, a lot of what we're looking at is to not only provide internet for them, which is improving their current condition, but also providing long-term improved top-of-line conditions for everybody in the city that needs further infrastructure improvement. So I think that's something that everybody can get excited and rally behind. And if we're spending city funds, and I think, looking at a name, I know Joe Garitano said, broadband, perhaps maybe improved internet access committee, because we're looking to improve internet access for everybody in the city. Like I said, starting with those who don't currently have it, and also adding those that currently do to make it better and keeping it that way.
Okay. So we're having a lot of discussion. I didn't want to get us off track here. Does anyone want to make a motion? Councilmember Dodwell.
I'd like to make a motion that we just leave it as internet access. Technology's changed. The type of method that you get out on the internet is going to change over years. And so this is going to have to be something that we look at ongoing, and what we put into place over the next 5 years may be totally, next 2 years may be totally updated to something else 3 or 5 years from now. So I just say we leave it as internet access is all I wanted to.
Okay, so we have a motion to change the name of the RIAC, Rural Internet Access, to Internet Access Committee. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Brost. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing no, Councilor Rambo.
Well, I'm not sure this is on the motion per se, but I was going to suggest a little bit earlier that we just shoot our favorite acronyms to a central repository the Internet Act, the REAC is going to be meeting very shortly to talk about the response from our consultant. We could loop them in the process via email and have a good candidate name in short order. We don't have to choose the name after 12 years. Tonight, it can be the next council meeting or something like that, and maybe we'll come up with a better acronym. That's all. Otherwise, I support, if we want to move forward, I support this notion. I'm not ready to second it, though.
Okay, well, we have a second from Councilmember Bros, so the motion is on the floor. Seeing no further discussion, Councilmember Garetano, I see your hand up raised. Are you still wanting to, your raise hand feature is on. Did you want to?
No, that's from before. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. Just want to make sure I don't pass you up here. Okay, all in favor of the motion to change the name of the Rural Internet Access Committee to Internet Access Committee, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
You're a no. We have one no, Councilmember Rambo. Any abstentions? Motion carries. City Attorney Young, is there anything needed to affect that change of name other than what was just done? And if so, what is that?
To change the name of a committee that was created by resolution and appointments by resolution, I would suggest an amendment to that resolution.
Okay, so can we have that resolution at the next council meeting to do that?
Yes, ma'am.
And without objection, technically the motion would then need to be to have a resolution prepared to change the name to be presented at the next council meeting. Is there any objection to that being the wording of the motion that was just passed? So instead of change of name, it'll be to have a resolution prepared to change the name. Councilmember Rambo.
Yeah, I don't want to drag this out any further, but I really do think we could maybe come up with a better name if we thought about it. And so if we have a couple of days or a few days before the legislation is actually prepared to kick that around somehow, I'd like to suggest that.
The motion is carried, but what you can do is at the next council meeting, if you think you have something better, you can always amend that resolution when it comes to the floor.
Well, I'm perfectly fine with it the way it is. I really do think we can come up with a jazzier name that will be more meaningful to residents.
That's all right. And if you do, that would be, since this motion's already passed, that would be the way to do that.
So everyone send them to the whole group and include the REAC, I would say, if you come up with a better acronym.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So that takes care of that. Now moving into the final part that I wanted to get to tonight, which is under strategic planning at least, which relates to Lake Chesterfield. So all of you presumably know the issue with respect to the lake, and it is now number 7 of our 8 goals, I believe, in that priority. And the issue that has been a problem for the lake for years has been the draining of that lake that leaves it something much less than a lake. And the residents a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, spent considerable funds to try to, of their own money, to try to stop the leaks. And that involved lots of cement and so forth. And my understanding is that to a fairly large extent that was successful, but the problem is that other leaks subsequently developed given the nature of the karst deposits and the bed of this lake. So I've had several discussions off and on with the leadership of the lake relative to course of action. And as I sit here tonight, I think my read of it is that they would like to do something, but that something has yet to be identified. And that something could involve any one of the following. It could involve putting a layer, for lack of a better word, a bladder, if you will, on the bottom of the lake that would be guaranteed for, I think, 20 years to stop the leaks. Another option would be to infill essentially the upper third of the lake, where the significant, if not virtually all of the leaks are located. And there's a third option, I think that escapes me at the moment, but essentially those are filling holes, filling holes like they did previously. The cost for any of these options ranges essentially from about $250,000 to roughly $750,000, depending on what option is done, when it's done, who it's done with, and so forth. So much like and this, if you recall from our last council meeting, I did a memo to all of you and labeled this as one of the three, what I call extraordinary expenditure items, the other two being rural internet access, and the next one being watershed and erosion issues. And so this is the third of those. So the decision before the council in terms of city participation on a monetary basis is exactly the same as it is for the other two. You have three options. Your first option is to spend no money. Your second option is to fund all of it once that amount is conclusively determined. And by the way, I think much like our internet access issue, my understanding is they're making rapid progress, and probably by the time the strategic plan is finalized, we'll have a good idea of what that definitive number is going to be. All right. So anyway, the three options: fund it, don't fund anything, fund part of it. And as you know, if you fund part of it or all of it, there could be resident participation as a component of that, either partially or in full. And I think, well, I'll just leave it at that. I have something else I want to say, but I don't want to get you off track. So those are the three options. Councilor McHugh.
Thank you for the information. And as you guys know, I live in Lake Chesterfield, and I was on the board for quite some time and have a lot of knowledge and hours put into the repairs and the spending in that community. I had a conversation with Mr. Crumley, who is that you had a meeting without me, Mayor, this week, and I wasn't invited to a Ward 7 meeting that dealt with Lake Chesterfield and my ward.
It was not a Ward 7 meeting, Councilor McCune.
Okay, so it dealt with Lake Chesterfield, and I asked you to have me join as a council member because I'm elected here for the residents of Lake Chesterfield and others abroad. So I was not invited. So after knowing that and getting the notice afterwards, I called Mr. Crumley, who you talked to on your meeting, as well as Mr. Kramer, who is listening in this evening, to kind of get the understanding of, so I could vote properly or try to understand how do I represent the constituents in Ward 7 and vote accordingly. So when I asked them, I said, did you ask the mayor, or was it understood to you guys that he's offering types of funding and we're going to vote tonight? Did he read the fine print that taxpayer money doesn't come free? That in order for us to give any money to Lake Chesterfield, they would have to relinquish ownership or right to that and give it to the city to have taxpayer money funded. Both of them said, no, that was not interested. And no, we are not interested in relinquishing any ownership or rights.
That's not true.
They both confirmed, and they're listening, and they can email you when they're done. Can you please not interrupt me? I'm speaking on behalf of the residents that I spoke to. I'm quoting them, sir, and they can qualify this when I'm done. So please do not interrupt me.
Okay, Councilor McCune, you're missing what I'm saying.
I'm not asking what you're saying. I want to continue my conversation as I don't interrupt you. Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm speaking on behalf of my residents and the people that were involved in your meeting. So again, Mr. Crumley also stated that they're not interested in any type of infill that you had suggested. There was two options on the table: the bentonite option, which is a clay or something of that layer, and then also filling in was another option, or putting a liner. No, they're not far enough to understand what the cost, and the generalization cost that you provided was fine. But also Mr. Crumley said, if it's $250,000 or $500,000, they have that money. They're not interested in city funds either. And this meeting was recorded. So having a summary of what they both explained to me this evening and to understand how I vote, I don't know how the city council can to discuss a private owned entity that one, the board can't make the decision, the shareholders have to, and there's 700 homes in that community, which I am a part of as well. So before we even go anywhere, I want you to answer the question, Mayor. Can the city provide money, as you told them that you could, we're voting on how we're going to fund them. Can the city do that free of charge with no relinquish of any type of ownership and just write them a check? Is that possible?
That's what I was trying to say earlier. The answer is yes, because you were going down that path, and that's just not an accurate path.
How is it?
City Attorney Young.
Mayor, I'm not sure I understand exactly.
So her
what-
question is, if the city were to provide funding, presumably either with or without any payback from residents, would it be, by virtue of providing that funding, automatically taking over title to the lake?
No.
Thank you.
How, if it's privately owned, Mr. Young, so like it's owned by the HOA, it's privately owned.
And so
And if
are
the tax,
people-
if the city is going to write a check to the community for them to maintain ownership of it or repair, is that permissible for taxpayer money?
Yes.
How?
Just like we do rural internet, it's private home that's getting internet access that the city put money up so that they could get. There's no difference other than a different location and a different amount and a different project.
Have we done this before?
I just said that, yes, rural internet.
We haven't signed a contract yet,
We signed lots of contracts for polls.
but we don't have it in place yet. So that's why I'm
We
asking
have it in
some
place all over
questions.
the place.
That's why I'm asking some questions, but I don't think this is going to go anywhere because of what they explained, and they have the money to fund it if it's that much money.
Councilmember Fleischer.
Thank you. I am also a member of Ward 7, as you know. And I was on the meeting because I was invited to the meeting. The meeting was initiated by members of Lake Chesterfield. They invited myself. They invited the mayor to be a part of that meeting. So we were on the meeting. We had got to talk to them after Councilmember McCune said last time that they had no interest in money from us at all. We thought that that was alarming. They heard that that was the claim being made, which is why they reached out to set us straight, more or less. And all they really did was do just that. They said, if there is funding available from the city, they would be interested in that. They also know that it's a big ask. I know it's a big ask. I'm going to come to you guys today, hoping that you will consider it. Ward 8 and Ward 7 both have things that funnel into that lake. And then that lake, when it does drain, it goes into Cox Creek, which is obviously a water erosion problem. So it's affecting other parts of our community besides just Ward 7. I'm realist here. I don't think that there's a chance, though it'd be great, that you guys would consider funding the whole thing. I'm not crazy here. But I think if there's a way that we could get involved and help them, because they've obviously done this before and it failed, they're interested in some sort of means. And Crystal was correct. They seem less interested in the filling of the property. They seem a little more interested in having a liner put in the bottom or filling the holes. And they don't know exactly what option's the best. They need to talk obviously to their residents and things like that. So I just want to put that out there that not everything that you've just heard here has been truthful. And I got a completely different story with the exact same people that Crystal's claiming she heard from. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Dodwell.
Thank you both for your input on things and clarification of information. Rather than leaving Lake Chesterfield as its own entity here on our strategic plan, would it not be better for us to move this topic into the watershed erosion plan so that we are looking at what impact that particular area has with the downstream issues that could be facing it and how we incorporate that? This is a watershed. It is part of our erosion concern, not only for that location, because if that lake leaks, it's going to erode downstream, and probably not in the best way if it isn't repaired. So I'm just making that motion that we move that into one of the activities that the Watershed Erosion Task Force has to work with. And
So are you suggesting that it be, instead of one of the top 8 goals, that it be a sub goal?
that it be a sub goal underneath the Watershed Erosion Task Force.
Okay. I have other people ahead of you, and I'll put you on the list. Councilmember Bertolino. You got your mic on. Sorry.
I'd like to second that, but also comment that I know we had the discussion about the Woods Road improvements and their problem with the with watershed during heavy storms and so on. And the topic at that time came up, we are going to be making improvements to private properties. We're going to be improving certain driveways and front yards and so on. And I don't recall any discussion at that time by city administrator, city council, or city attorney, anybody else that said, we can't do that because it's on private property. I don't think that was even brought up. I just said it was a good deed to do because it affected the road itself. And even though therefore we would have to improve some personal property in order to improve the road, and therefore it was okay. That was my recollection. So.
Correct. Councilmember Nyan.
I just have a general question so I understand. If we were to fund the city part or all or whatever of the lake, is that setting a precedent for other subdivisions that have retention, detention? I know there's a Ward 3 subdivision that's having leakage in theirs, and they're looking at resolutions to try to fix that. Now, does that mean going forward that that could be an issue that we deal with? I mean, obviously this is on a much larger scale, I understand that, but would that be something down the road that could become an issue? That all subdivisions or anybody that's having leakage or whatever problems comes to the city for help in repairing?
I'll take a stab at that. I mean, I guess theoretically anything the council does, while it may not set a legal precedent, someone could argue that, hey, you did it there, why don't you do it for me, or what have you. I think, as you were asking the question, you hit on the distinction, which is this is a larger, in terms of issue, in terms of the number of residents that it affects. But your point is well taken, and those are the kinds of things that all of you, and if I have to break a tire or whatever, I, think about when we make and we do things, so. Councilor McCune.
On the motion to move it under watershed, I think that during that committee talking, I'm sorry that Councilmember Remy's not here. When they started looking at that, they chunked out Lake Chesterfield to not be part of the water erosion, and they didn't want to address it under that committee at all. So it got removed. So I think putting it as a sub goal is not in line with what that objective was for that committee.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
I've got a couple comments. One, I see Lake Chesterfield as being more of a neighborhood issue and more appropriately funded through NID, or if they already have the funding, then I don't see the reason that the city should support that by adding additional funds to it. If they already have the funding to mitigate the situation, then I think it should stay a neighborhood issue.
Councilor Flasher, to that point, do you have an understanding of whether they have the money or not?
In the meeting that we had, they did not express that they had a plan in place for how they would pay for it. That doesn't mean that they can't financially pay for it. They didn't necessarily say that, but they seemed very open to, if we have, as a council, we have any sort of plan that might help them in the funding, they would be very open to that and very receptive of it, which is why I've been confused as to why anybody in my ward would suggest that that's not the case. That's been my biggest confusion.
Yeah, I don't have access to their books, but I guess I would be shocked that they would have asked for the meeting if they had money and didn't need to, really worry about that. But Councilor Fleischer.
In response to that, Crystal said this too. I mean, they've spent money on that before. I mean, they've spent money on it before. So it's a hard sell to the community too, because they tried to fix it, and though it fixed one thing, it caused another problem, and the lake continued to drain.
Yeah.
So there's people in my part of the ward that are really reluctant to be involved with any of that type of stuff themselves for that reason, and it makes it's a hard thing. It's a hard sell.
And I think to the extent the council, I mean, the way to solve it, to the extent the council, if you decide to participate financially under two of the three options, your motion's just conditioned on the assumption that, that they don't have the money to do it. And if they do, then you don't contribute. You just qualify your motion. Councilmember Edens. I'm sorry, I just noticed Councilmember Edens and Councilmember Bartoni. My apology. Which one of you was first? Do you know?
I wasn't finished.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Councilmember McCutcheon's not finished. Just a moment.
So given the fact that they don't have the funding, then I could support a NID because the comments that Mr. Bertolino just made about private property, I know whenever the issue of Evergreen comes up, that everybody's going, no, we shouldn't contribute to that. We shouldn't assist them because it's private property. That is a flooding issue, especially with the heavy rains. And we're not asking for private property per se to be mitigated, but the situation that causes the damage to the private property being mitigated. So if we're going to say, well, this is private property and we can support that, then I'm going to ask everybody to support the Evergreen issue as well. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Edens and Bartoni, which of you were first?
I think Dawn was.
Okay, Councilmember Bartoni.
Thank you. So I got a couple questions for Director Vunich, and this is going to be to help me remember some things and maybe help some council members also that may not know a few of these things. So Joe, how many subdivisions drain into Lake Chesterfield?
Today I did an analysis for Councilmember Flasher, and I believe it's about 7 or 8.
Okay, and of those 7 or 8, from my understanding, is only one subdivision actually pays for the maintenance of it, though. Is that correct?
Yes, the Harbors at Lake Chesterfield, that association is the only one that pays.
And how many houses are in the harbors of Lake Chesterfield?
Roughly speaking, about 600, as I recall.
And then do we know how many are total of the 7 or 8 subdivisions that drain into it? Do we know that total number by chance?
Well, one's as large as Nantucket, which has over, I believe, 100 plus homes itself. So there's quite a few. I don't know the exact count, though. I apologize.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, I knew that was kind of a guess. But so that being said, of the 6 or 7 subdivisions that are not paying for maintenance in Lake Chesterfield, are they willing to start paying for maintenance in Lake Chesterfield? Do we know that or not?
Don, if I could, Joe can respond here in just one second. If I could just mention this while Joe's getting his answer ready. I mentioned earlier that I'd had several conversations with the Lake Chesterfield group. Initially, I started by including subdivision trustees from those neighboring subdivisions that you're talking about in hopes that maybe they might want to, number one, at least learn more about the situation, and 2, potentially have some involvement. So that much I can say has been done, but I didn't press them on that particular call as to whether they wanted to, put any money into it or whatever. But I just mentioned that so that you know that at least was in my mind something that should be thought about from the get-go, and so that's why I did that. Joe, anything you want to add to Don's answer?
Mr. Mayor and Mr. Bartoni, I think in years past, the Homeowners Association at the Harbors at Lake Chesterfield has reached out to other subdivisions seeking their participation in the repairs. And generally speaking, I don't think they've gotten much support.
Yeah, and that's what kind of leads me to the next thing is if the residents of wards 7 and 8 that are reaping the benefits of it aren't willing to pay for the repairs, why would they expect the rest of the residents of the whole city of Wildwood to be willing to do that? You know, I mean, I'm kind of agreeing with where Deborah was going with this. I mean, it's kind of a neighborhood thing. And if all of the residents of Ward 7 and 8 and all of the subdivisions want to contribute, and then there's still an issue and they want the city support, I'd be more open to that. But until they're willing to put their own skin in the game, I'm not going to be able to support putting, you know, the rest of the city's, you know, skin in it either. That being said, I need a little bit of education on how exactly a NID works. Who does that affect, and how is that money collected, and how is that used? Can somebody explain that, help me with that a little bit?
So it could be a neighborhood or a community improvement district, a NID or a SID. And essentially it is, by analogy, very similar to a run-of-the-mill subdivision. It's just that it is usually larger in terms of the people that are members of it, but it can assess, like subdivisions do for their roadways and snow maintenance. It could assess for you know, the fixing of the lake. It can issue bonds to do that. So it's a legally recognized corporate entity, and it would be incorporated, but it's essentially just a much larger and grander subdivision, basically.
So is it collected with personal property tax? Is it just you get a bill in the mail? How's it collected? I'm not sure about that either.
It could probably do, well, I don't know if it could do a property tax, but City Attorney Young, do you want to answer Don's question specifically?
A CID does have an assessment or personal property tax option, depending upon which is chosen by those that file the petition for the creation of that district. And NID is only an assessment.
Okay, thank you. And is it like, does it go to voters? Is it just the council that approves it? How does it come to finality?
There's two options. One is either by the filing of a petition by the requisite number of property owners, or there can be an election.
Okay, well, I mean, that being said, I wouldn't even support that until, or maybe that would be the way to get the other subdivisions to, you know, to pay for the maintenance that they're reaping the benefits of. But other than that, I'm not going to be able to support any other city money until that first step is taken.
And to your point, Councilmember Bartoni, one of the things that I mentioned on the call last week with the leadership of Lake Chesterfield was that if the city did come down on this issue, similar to what you've mentioned, that one possibility might be for the city to, you know, offer its city attorney and maybe Joe and some others to help with the creation of that SID or NID that they would then use to do what you're talking about. So it wouldn't be, I guess, direct money, but it would be assistance, you know, in the form of maybe helping them, you know, get it going if the council wanted to do that. So Councilmember Edens, thank you for your patience.
Yes, so I would like to echo what Don said and Councilmember McCutcheon, but I do want to add a couple of other things. I'm not in support of our taxpayer dollars going towards this. Sitting on the erosion, you know, committee, I can tell you that there are many retention and detention areas throughout the city that have money that needs to be spent to either improve drainage rates or are perhaps leaking themselves, including several in my own ward. But I really want to stress the difference in goals of repair. So there is repair for function and there is repair for aesthetics. And we need to be managing goals, especially if we're having a discussion about money. So when we've had homeowners and HOA folks come, and this would have been with old council, you know, they wanted their lake back. They wanted their recreation and their beauty back, which is understandable. When this was built by a developer that kind of sold a bad bill of health, right? They took a mandated detention and made it a retention that exceeded the volume that it had to hold so that it could, quote, become recreational, and then themed an entire neighborhood around it with, you know, cute sailboats and cute names. But in terms of an erosion standpoint, what we care about is the metering and flow rates, and not the size of the lake, which technically doesn't have to exist the current way that it is. So that's another reason that I would have concerns about, you know, spending money is again, what the actual goal is. One of my friends, when I say, hey, do you want to help with this? His favorite quote is, you know, Lauren, that sounds like a you problem. And to me, this sounds like a neighborhood problem. And I have a really bad sketch, and I can't show depth perception, but this is supposed to be the road. Hang on. This is the road, and this is supposed to be the hill on either side. And over here is the lake. So we own the road. Sorry, this is mirrored, so I'm having a hard time with the image. We own the road down to kingdom come, so to speak, is the phrase that I heard, to the core of the earth. But we don't own the sides of the bank that actually leaked in. Now, what we can suggest to the homeowners, or certainly the erosion task force would suggest, is you can reduce the size of the lake, which they're not going to like to hear this, because then the water is not going to go towards the road at all. It's essentially creating a buffer that's better maintenance for the city. Now, again, this doesn't fulfill the goal of that recreational look, but it goes back to function. So when you have conversations with them and you want to use an erosion as an argument for why it should be done, make sure you're having a discussion with these homeowners that there's a difference between aesthetics and pure functionality. And so I know how many detention problems I have in my ward and every other ward from that committee. It's not its own watershed. It drains into a watershed. You've got other communities that aren't willing to pay. I will support a NID or a SID so that we don't have free riders in the system to help the Lake Chesterfield homeowners out. But again, don't get sold a money pit that's a literal pit. I mean, with the type of rock, I'm not even sure. I'm not even convinced if you lined it, if it would still hold water figuratively and literally. So I hate to be the curmudgeon, but that's where I'm at. It's a money pit. It's a Trojan horse. Don't accept it. Let it stay private property, and we'll help you assess each other to pay for it yourselves. So that's where I'm at.
So councilors, the motion on the floor is the motion on the floor is to put Lake Chesterfield as a subset goal, remove it from one of the 8, and put it as a subset goal of watershed erosion. So this isn't about whether you want to pay for Lake Chesterfield or what you want to do with it. We're going to come back to that, but after we get this motion decided. And that was a no on the motion. That was a no on that, in case I wasn't clear, because the goal that we've been talking about is to restore it to its aesthetic beauty and not to functionality. So as long as that discussion exists, it doesn't belong under watershed erosion. Okay. So I've got several speakers that are several council members that want to speak. And so I'm going to go down the list and just make sure you want to speak to whether to include the issue of whether to include it as a sub goal of watershed erosion. And if you don't, that's okay. I'm going to keep you on the list and I'll come right back to you as soon as we get this motion done. Councilmember Clark, are you speaking on the motion as to whether to include it?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I may be repeating a couple of things that were already said, but the Watershed Erosion Task Force has already done this assessment with Dr. Hammer, and he's come in and he's looked at everything, and he's come up with 9 different, a list of 9 that have been prioritized. And Lake Chesterfield was not one that he came up with. And just trying to meet the criteria that he laid out with the health, the safety, the environment, the riparian condition, utilities risk, roads and trails, and so on and so on, that would not be very high on the list. So just, I would not support it to move it to the Watershed Erosion Task Force.
Let me ask it this way. Does anyone want to speak in favor of the motion? Councilor Galani, I have you next. Do you want to speak in favor of the motion? Okay. Councilmember Farmer, you've been patient. Thank you. Your hand is raised. Do you want to speak in favor or against this motion?
I was actually going to speak against it. I was just going to let everybody know what I remember why we took it out in the first place from.
Okay. All right. So you're not speaking in favor. Okay. Councilmember Flasher speaking for or against the motion. We're going to get there in just one second. Councilmember Bartoni, you speaking, your hand is raised. Did you want to speak on whether to include, do you want to include it as part of watershed erosion or no?
No, that's not what I was going to talk about. I just forgot to mention something earlier when I was talking.
All right, so we're going to come back to you. So I haven't heard anyone speak in favor of the motion, but let's go ahead and take care of it. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. We have 2 ayes. Councilmember, sure, go ahead. Councilmember Dodwell, I'm sorry.
I would like to make it an aye, and that it gets put on the Watershed Erosion Task Force so that it can be looked at a much later date. I agree that we have other instances where it's more of a requirement, but I felt that putting it in that group, the subdivision can get better guidelines and guidance on how it fits in the rest of the scheme with watersheds and what they should be doing as a subdivision to take care of it.
Okay. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
We have 2 ayes. Councilmember Dodwell, Councilmember Bertolino. All those opposed, please say aye.
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 Any abstentions? Motion fails. Okay, so now back to the list of, and that sort of takes us back to the broader issue of the lake. And so it stays in the strategic plan as is, and sort of what the city might want to do about it. Councilmember Galani, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's a number of different approaches that can be taken, one being a NID or a SID. As far as funding it from a city standpoint, I would support a type of funding that would allow the city to recoup its funds to potentially, if you're talking about a situation where the HOA is not able to fund it themselves and it's something that needs to be done, the city could step in and offer more so of financing on a certain level to assist them in getting that done with a payback option that may result over the course of, maybe 5 or 10 years or something like that. I do think that it is a lot bit more of a issue than simply a retention pond or something. There's major subdivisions over there that are affected by it aesthetically and functionally. There's recreational paths all around it as well. I do understand Councilmember Bartoni's what he said as well regarding the fact that, the other neighborhoods that are a part of the drainage into that lake ought to be participating as well too. So there is definitely a sensible argument there. So I think it's, there's a lot of things that would come into play, but I would be in favor of a partially city funding with some strings attached, which would probably include those other neighborhoods hopping on board with that payback option, because now all of a sudden, if we go from 600 homes in Lake Chesterfield to maybe 1,500 homes with all those 8 neighborhoods included, that are all kicking in an extra, I don't know, $50 or $100 a year in subsidy to go towards paying the city back, perhaps. We're not talking about many millions of dollars like rural internet or something like that, which is a much bigger deal. This, $250,000 to $750,000. If you've got 1,000 homes participating, you could have that paid back pretty quickly. So it'd be more so the way I would look at it as the city offering a financing term to the issue versus funding the issue out of pocket with no, expectation of a return on that investment to help members of the city.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Farmer, you still have your hand raised. Did you want to speak further on this?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of add a little bit, I guess, on to Councilmember Galani's point. I think, and Mr. Vunich, I don't know if you'll know this off the top of your head. I know we've discussed this with the pond over in my subdivision. There's a bunch of these detention ponds in certain subdivisions that all the other subdivisions seem to feed into. And, as Don asked, nobody else wants to support it. So I think the reason we were doing this with the watershed was this is a bigger problem that, as Lauren said, we need to make sure the watershed is functioning. It doesn't have to be pretty. It kind of has to work. And so in this case, I think a wider conversation about getting these kind of drainage subdivisions involved in paying for the maintenance of a lot of these is going to help us in the long run. But that was something we designed to put down the road. So I think if we're helping put money to figure out how to get the whole city involved in terms of if your water is draining into this lake, this is the little fee that you pay. That's great. But I think paying for all this stuff up front is probably not the best choice.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Flasher.
Yeah, just one comment that was made that kind of struck me. Don made the comment that why would people want to pay for something that doesn't affect them? I mean, I could say the exact same thing about internet for myself. Now, I don't agree with that, but I could make that same exact point. So I think that that's kind of a ridiculous argument, honestly. The drainage or whatever you want to say of Lake Chesterfield affects our whole city. It's bad. It's a bad look for our city. It's something that's talked about negatively about our city constantly. Fixing this will benefit the city, will benefit the values of the home within our city, just like fixing the internet will benefit the values of the home within the city, because we don't have to hear about the internet issues that we're having anymore. Plus, everyone has the access that they need. So that comment struck me a little wrong, and I just wanted to call that. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Rambo.
Yeah, I have a philosophical agreement with Councilmember Flasher, but I will say that the rationale behind the WETF is threats to infrastructure, in this case, the road. And for that reason alone, I would be happy to consider some city funding for that. The problem with the NID or SID, as I see it, is some of those neighborhoods are downstream. I mean, this lake is downstream of some of those neighborhoods, and they're not going to be inclined to pay for an aesthetic improvement to a lake in a neighborhood that they can't see as directly affecting them. It makes more sense to try to spend city dollars sort of citywide to correct the major erosion problems that we have. But my main comment was it has aged a little bit while I've been waiting, but this lake is doing its watershed erosion task force job already, because it's supposed to be a catchment and retention basin, and the water is going out the bottom. It's not coming through the dam. I gather that there's no real threat to the dam or anything like that. And so it's not the problem comes back to being one of aesthetics. It's not affecting Cox Creek, to my current knowledge, by overflowing the spillway inappropriately or anything like that. So we should consider that it's already doing the retention job that we originally asked of it.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Bartoni, you still have your hand raised on Zoom. Did you want to say anything further?
Yes, thank you. So I got a comment that I was going to make earlier and I forgot to, but just to clarify what I had said earlier, Mr. Flasher, was I didn't think of it as that's your problem, not the city's problem. What I had said was, if the people who are actually using the lake aren't willing to pay for it, why would you expect somebody else to pay for it? So I think that they just need to step up first. And then if there's a problem afterwards, then the city can possibly help them out. What I had wanted to ask or make a comment earlier, and this is for Director Vunich also, is the $34 that we have spent year to date on Lake Chesterfield. I think that was last year, if I remember correctly. That was the city paying to test the integrity of the road and the dam, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, sir. We paid geotechnology to do an analysis of the roadway and the area around the roadway to determine the dam stability. And they issued a report saying that for all intents and purposes, it's in good shape.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember McCune.
Thank you, Councilmember Flasher, for your last comment. I think it's important, and I think it is a well thing that I think everybody had good comments on it, but it is a neighborhood, and applying a NID or a SID, the HOA years ago looked at that. And if we have other people pay into any funding of that lake, we would have to open up for public access for them to enjoy the lake as well. The path is even private. It's owned by the subdivision. So I would just be cautious on the NID and the SID. And again, that would have to be a shareholders thing. But what's important to understand, it is talk negative. It is part of City Wildwood, and it does affect property values. So my comment is that while I am a Lake Chesterfield resident that pays these assessments, and Mr. Cross is also in there as well, because if our property values go down because they're looking at a mud hole, because these condos that back up to it and their property value goes down because that's what they're looking at, it affects Nantucket. It'll affect Copper Lakes because the comps in the area, if anybody knows anything about real estate, you're going to see your property values be compared to houses in Lake Chesterfield if they're compared to a mud hole, if you want to say, if the lake is not functioning in the aesthetics realm, because that's what it was built for. So I do appreciate it is the aesthetic aspect because it's privately held. And that's what they want, is to maintain property values. But again, we don't want the poor city side of Ward 7 in Lake Chesterfield if something's not done. So, and just let me reiterate what I said earlier. I'm not against trying to get a fix or try to find some solution. And I have worked hard at this. And I know that you guys were talking about the balance sheets and things at that homeowners. I'm well aware of what we have in that budget because I am a paying person, and I don't see a problem there. But if you're saying, where my concern was is if taxpayer money can help assess that, then why not? If we can get some money to help and then it benefits the city as a whole, then I think that we're on the right track. So again, I just want to say thank you for your comments. And to clarify my earlier comment, Mr. Flasher, Mr. Crumley just clarified by a text message and said that he invited the mayor and then the mayor invited you. And I was precluded. So it was one invite and Mayor Boland left me out. So thank you for that clarification and Mr. Crumley. So again, I appreciate everybody's comments. But again, I think that we're still too early in the game to understand what that board and our community wants as a whole. So can they readdress maybe getting funding later in the game once they kind of figure out what they want to do? Or is this the only time that that's available?
Well, we're getting lots of carts before horses here. Just one second. So the issue of if the group in Lake Chesterfield forms a SID or a NID, and other neighboring subdivisions participate in that, is it the case, as was just said, that they have to have access to the lake, or can they participate in it without having access to the lake, they being the other subdivision?
Not necessarily.
Thank you. So lots of good discussion. I guess let's do like we did on the last one.
Mayor, I had a question at the end of my comment you didn't answer.
Well, okay, so I'll answer it now. I'm not going to answer it because I don't think it's timely. We need to first of all decide, the council, what it wants to do relative to the funding. Then once that's done, I think your question is ripe, but right now I don't think it's germane to what is being discussed.
I thought it was germane because we're voting if we can get funding now, or if we can't do it now, then we can't get it later.
I know you do, but I don't. So we're going to come back to it. We're going to go forward with the motion or the discussion at hand, which is what the council on a straw poll basis wants to do. Then we'll come back to your question. To do them in reverse is not logical. So relative to Lake Chesterfield, much like we did with rural internet, now known as internet access, not going to hold you to it. You can always change your mind. I'd like to get, and I think for the benefit of the body, a feel for what the council thinks relative to the three options. One option would be city funding of all of it. Option two would be city funding of part of it. Either of those could involve participation with repay by the residents, much like we had in our discussion last week. So if either of those are decided, that'll be my next question to you, which is whether you want to include any of that. or option 3, which is no funding. And if that is decided, it's possible, if you think we should do it, to offer up some of our team members, such as our city attorney and Joe and others, to assist them being Lake Chesterfield and potentially neighboring subdivisions relative to how to form the SID and operate it and so forth. Okay, so Councilmember Bertolino.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just a clarification. Can you, on number 3, you said that there was no city funding, but we would offer up assistance. Could that offering up assistance also be part of number 2?
It could be part of 2 or 1, all 3.
Okay.
My thought in mentioning, that's a great question. My thought in mentioning it only relative to number 3 was that if you don't want to do any funding, that would be a way for you to at least, the city at least, rather to do something. But yes, it could be part of any of the 3. All right? You good with that, Dave? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let's call the roll for the city provides all funding.
Councilmember Garitano.
No.
He's not here right now.
He's muted. We just got he.
All right. I'll try it again. This is a no.
Councilmember Flasher.
This is for just all funding? Yep. Is the option? No to all funding.
Councilmember Jaxie.
No to all funding.
Councilmember Bertolino.
No to all funding.
Councilmember Dodwell.
No to all funding.
Councilmember Nyan. No. Councilmember Bartoni.
No.
Councilmember,
I didn't hear his.
he said no.
Okay.
Councilmember Bros.
No.
Councilmember Clark.
No.
Councilmember Edens.
No.
Was that a no?
No to all funding.
Councilmember Remy.
No.
Councilmember Farmer.
No.
Councilmember Galani.
No.
Councilmember McCune.
I have to abstain because I'm a shareholder and I could benefit from the funding.
Councilmember Rambo.
No.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
No.
Okay, so the second question, again, calling the roll, do you think the city should provide some funding with that amount to be determined at a later point? Please call the roll for some funding.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes to some funding.
Councilmember Jaxie.
Yes to some funding.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
No.
Councilmember Nyan. No. Councilmember Bartoni.
No.
Councilmember Bros.
Yes.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Edens.
No.
Councilmember Remy.
No.
Was that a no?
No.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer, I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Yes to some funding.
Councilmember Galani.
Yes.
Councilmember McCune.
Abstain because I can benefit as a shareholder.
Councilmember Rambo.
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
No.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yes.
Was that a yes?
Yes.
Was that a yes? Okay. That was a yes, Joe?
That is correct. That is a yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that motion carries. So that would render the third option moot. And on that note, we've accomplished a lot again this evening. And we've got about 5 minutes before we start the 7 o'clock meeting. So I would suggest we, without objection, adjourn the work session. Before we do that, I just want to mention, Councilor McCune, so earlier when you were speaking and I was trying to interject something, that's called a point of information, and points of information have preference to anyone speaking at the time. So they interrupt, and that's just procedurally what Robert's rules allows. I didn't want to debate it with you at the time, but that's why I was doing that. So when someone is interrupting to try to say something relative to an informational piece, anyone of the body has the right to do that, okay? All right, with that, any have any questions about that? Okay. There are a couple of motions, there aren't many. Point of privilege, point of order, and a point of information can interrupt any speaker at any time, no matter where the body is on any motion being amended, made for the first time or whatever. They take precedent to any other motion in terms of interruption. And the theory being, if someone's saying something that's inaccurate, it's important to facilitate the decision-making of the body to get the accurate information out there as soon as possible. Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the work session. Thank you. Made by Councilmember Dodwell, second by Councilmember McCutcheon. Non-debatable. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? So the work session is adjourned. We'll take about a 5-minute break and start right at 7 o'clock. Thank you again for all the progress on strategic planning. Okay, good evening, council members. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the City Council for Monday, March 22nd, 2021. Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Bullen,
Here.
Councilmember Garitano,
Here.
Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Jaxi,
Here.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell, Councilmember Nyan, Councilmember Bartoni,
Here.
Councilmember Bros,
Here.
Councilmember Clark,
Here.
Councilmember Edens,
Here.
Councilmember Remy,
Here.
Councilmember Farmer,
Here.
Councilmember Galani,
Here.
Councilmember McCune,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo,
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
All right, thank you and welcome to members of the public that are with us and maybe watching this evening. For those who are comfortably able, if you please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda is approval of minutes from the council's March 8, 2021 work session and regular meeting. If anyone has any comments or suggested changes, we can entertain those now. Otherwise, I've asked for a motion to approve the minutes as presented, made by Councilmember Rambo. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Oh, sorry. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Moving next to public participation. This is a valuable component of our meeting. Anyone who wishes to speak must complete a speaker card or raise hand on Zoom. And if you complete a card, provide it to the city clerk who is seated to the left of the podium. When your name is called, please approach the podium and state your name and ward. And to make sure all that who wish to speak have the opportunity to do so, there is a 5-minute time limitation, and I will let you know when that time is reached. If you have any questions for any of us, you may ask those. And as to any elected official that wishes or chooses to respond, he or she will have 3 minutes as to all questions to do so. And we may post those answers and your question on the city's website. Finally, please be respectful to others in making your remarks. This means that interrupting other speakers and using profane and abusive language are prohibited. And I want to thank you in advance for following these. First speaker card, please.
The first speaker card is Niall Stevens, wishing to comment about expenditures and payments to Hamilton Weber.
Is it on or now or just go? Okay. Niall Stevens, Ward 8. So tonight's expenditures still include payments going to Hamilton Weber for the Tony Salvatore case. And 2 weeks ago, I had asked the council to look at new legal services for the city and also to ask the mayor to resign due to the failure of leadership and the poor legal advice surrounding the Tony Salvatore lawsuit. And as some of you may recall, at the end of public participation, Mayor Bolin attempted to blame me as the impetus of the city losing a huge lawsuit to Mr. Salvatore. And I just wanted to come back and clear up the record tonight. So one, I did a public records request for a March 2019 meeting of the city council. That's where I had voted to accept Mr. Salvatore's original demand letter. Now that was closed session material. It's now open records, but obviously I saw the problems. A lot of council members saw the problems, and I voted to end this 2 years ago. And Tony Salvatore would have never been awarded $300,000 if my motion in 2019 had passed. So Mr. Bolin, don't ever blame me for this issue. This is your issue. All right. And now if you read the court documents also, and I encourage you to do so if you haven't read those, not only does it show that the city staff thought that what Mayor Bolin was asking them to do was immoral, the court documents also show that Mayor Bolin deleted records he was supposed to have retained during the case. So that's why the settlement includes training for records retention and records preservation. So just take a step back and look at this. Wildwood city leaders worked together to take away a citizen's First Amendment free speech rights. When that citizen, Mr. Salvatore, fought back, both the city administrator and the mayor both deleted records in the case. Now, 2 years later, the city has spent a fortune on this, and the mayor is still blaming other people. So I'm not here to ask the city council to prevent this from ever happening again in the future. I am here to ask that you hold people accountable for the bad choices right now. This case clearly shows just the bad government trifecta of waste, fraud, and abuse. It is a waste of time and a waste of money. Tony Salvatore should never have gotten $300,000. Hamilton Weber should never have been paid $30,000 for this case, especially when we had other counsel working on it. And how much time of the staff had been wasted that could not go to other citizens' requests. This is fraud, all right? Deleting records is fraud. Having a Ward 3 council member go to a Ward 3 meeting and lie about contacting Tony Salvatore's attorneys, that is fraud. And this is an abuse. This is an abuse of power from the start. And it's abuse of power still today, where you're using your privileges as the chair to blame me when everyone knows right here that I tried to stop this in 2019, okay? So you, city council members who are not involved in this, a couple over here that you didn't have anything to do with this, but you know what? If you don't hold people accountable for waste, fraud, and abuse, you become part of the waste, fraud, and abuse. So again, I ask you to do your job, to fire Hamilton Weber immediately, censure the mayor, vote in no confidence, ask for his resignation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker card, please.
The next speaker card is Crystal McCune wishing to comment about legal spending process.
Crystal McCune, Ward 7. I'm here as a citizen to talk to the council since I'm leaving. I want to talk about legal spending. I know that we all have our niche in our own professions and that we're very diverse in what we do for a living, and we understand IT and different things. I'm in the legal department and I understand how legal billing works. I have worked for a law firm. I'm in private corporate. I understand this and I review legal bills, and I've also been a billable hour person in my career as well as a paralegal. I question some of the billing from Hamilton Weber with Mr. Young, as I want you guys to understand that he's a contractor. He is somebody that we contract with and we do legal bills. I am not questioning your ability. I think you're very smart, so there's nothing against your character. But what I'm talking about is a process that I'd like to see the council maybe put into place for legal spending. That is when we get lawsuits, do we have a procedure or a policy who makes the decision of when the insurance company should take the case on? Because they have lawyers that represent the city in their best ability, and they can do the job at a lot less cost than what Mr. Young's billable hours are. That this exceeds outside. I think you're $175 an hour. So if you guys look at the expenditures and look at the cost, I think Mr. Niles had quoted over $800,000 since Mr. Weber or Mr. Young has been part of the city of expenditure. So I think what we also miss is the Salvatore case. We had a insurance attorney that's representing the city, could look at discovery, could present different aspects of what should be permissible and not. And instead of that, I've asked Mr. Young, were you co-counsel? He said, no, it would have been a lot more than that. So again, he's a contractor. I just think that there needs to be a procedure when we kick it to the insurance company that we pay a premium on for a lower insurance or a lower legal bill than him at an hourly rate reviewing sunshine law requests. Look at the expenditures. What is he reviewing? Could it be done cheaper, or what are we looking at? So I'm just looking for a procedure to stop that cost. Mr. Brose is really heavy on how much we're spending. We hit over budget, the different requests that come in. So again, I think that's why I'm here and I'm trying to really present this, because we look at every other contractor. We look at every other spending, but for some reason we're missing the bar here and we're not looking at this. I'm not saying to fire Mr. Young, but I'm saying that we need to put some eyes on it as a council to just make sure we understand the spending. I did question Mr. Cross to look at some of the billable hours on the expenditures a couple weeks ago. I questioned him, do you look at the bills? Do you question the bills? Have you ever challenged Mr. Young on some of the billable time? Because it seems a little excessive. And after the meeting, I was both yelled at by him and yelled at by you because I questioned your authority. I am a citizen and a woman that didn't need to have that abuse. I didn't need your mean comments and you raising your voice at me either. And I think that the partners at Hamilton Weber would be very disappointed in that. I am a citizen and I am somebody that you should respect as well because you are a contractor. I question your billable hours and I have every right. I didn't claim that you were unethical. So I have that right. So for both of you, you both owe me an apology for treating me that way. And it's unacceptable because I can question. That's what I do for the citizens of why I'm elected. So again, I think that this needs to be looked at as a council, put in policies and procedures that maybe control spending, because Mr. Cross says, oh, I never see any problems with Mr. Young's bills. Well, no, you don't, because you're buddies with them. So again, that's your duty to oversee the spending of the city. I think we all put our campaign stuff on that's what we're here to, is to watch that spending. So please put in a procedure policy. When I leave council, I'll be back here at the podium to see if we can do something like that, maybe work together, because I see other cities doing it and I think that we could do a better job at it. So thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker card, please.
I do not have any more speaker cards.
Okay. Do we have any raised hands? I think I already mentioned that, but if anyone wants to speak on Zoom, you can raise your hand and we'll get you moved over. Anyhow, 2603. All right, I will raise that when we come to it. So anyone else? Okay, if she comes back, let me know. Otherwise, we're going to accommodate her request. Okay. All right. We have one appointment that's moved to the consent agenda. No public hearings. Moving into legislation, second readings. Bill 2600 is before the council for final passage, and it concerns wards 1, 6, and 8. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Clark, seconded by Councilmember McCutcheon. All in favor, please say, I'm sorry, Councilmember Garitano, I missed his hand, my apology. Councilmember Garitano seconds. All in favor of the motion for second reading, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? My apology to the Zoom attendees. I'm gonna try to remember to pause for your vote. Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2600.
Bill 2600, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute a contract on behalf of the city with NB West Contracting Company for the resurfacing of various public streets within the city, including traffic control and other incidental items as shown on the construction drawings and specifications. Second reading.
Okay, thank you. Rick, do you have anything, Rick Brown, anything further you would like to mention relative to Bill 2600?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have nothing further. The bill is ready for final passage. Of course, the department is available for any questions or comments.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Rick or any comments on the bill? All right, seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2600.
Councilmember Jaxie.
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan.
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Yes.
Councilmember Bros.
Yes.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes.
Councilmember Remy.
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
All right. Bill 2600 has passed. Moving next to Bill 2601, it's before the council for final passage and it concerns Ward 1. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Clark, seconded by Councilmember Brost. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2601.
Bill 2601, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing a boundary adjustment plat that will result in the reconfiguration of two lots identified as adjusted lots A1 and B1 of the boundary adjustment plat of lots A and B and part of U.S. Survey 132, recorded in Plat Book 369, page 9, all being part of Township 43 North, Range 3 West of the 5th Principal Meridian, more specifically located on the west side of North Etherton Road, north of Centaur Road, Chesterfield Valley area, which will hereafter be known as Boundary Adjustment Plat of Adjusted Lots A and B in U.S. Survey 132, second reading.
Thank you. Joe Vinich, do you have anything further you would like to mention relative to Bill 2601?
No, sir, Mr. Mayor, but the department is available for any questions regarding the bill.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Joe or any comments on Bill 2601 by any member of the council? All right, seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2601.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy.
Yes.
Was that a yes?
Yes. Yes.
Councilmember Farmer, Councilmember Farmer. Let's come back to him.
We'll come back to him. Go ahead.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Jaxie,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
There you go. Okay, so the city attorney has just advised that under Missouri law, you actually have to be, if you're participating by Zoom, you have to be able to be seen on video by law to vote. So Councilmember Farmer, are you in a position to do that, or do you want to take a pass on your vote relative to
my
this?
video not coming through?
You're coming through, but by law, you have to be, it can't be your picture. You have to be seen on video when you're voting.
Yeah, I just, is my video not working?
Your video's not working. We just see a picture of you. It's a good picture, but we just see a picture.
Well, okay, then I can pass. That's fine.
Okay. All right, so he's going to pass. Moving into, I'm sorry, Bill 2602 is before the council also for final passage. It's our last one for second readings, and it concerns Ward 2. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Ward 2. Made by Councilmember Edens, seconded by Councilmember Bartoni. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2602.
Bill 2602, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing a replacement deposit agreement with extensions of the associated letters of credit, which are made part hereof and attached hereto, for the Britton Wood subdivision, a 12-lot residential subdivision located in the southeast quarter of the northeast quarter of Section 23, Township 45 North, Range 3 East, City of Wildwood, St. Louis County, Missouri, and more specifically situated on the north and south sides of Orville Road, east of State Route 109, second reading.
Thank you. Joe, do you have anything you would like to mention relative to Bill 2602? Joe Benich?
Again, Mr. Mayor, there have been no changes to the bill. The department is available for any questions or comments regarding the matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Joe or any comments on Bill 2602? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2602.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan.
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Yes.
Councilmember Bros.
I'm not hearing Don, so I'll make sure that,
Okay.
Don, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you on your votes there.
I said yes.
There you go. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Bros.
Yes.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes. Yes.
Councilmember Remy.
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
I can't hear that. Is that a yes?
Yes. Can you see me this time?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great.
Councilmember Galani.
Yes.
Councilmember McCune.
Yes.
Councilmember Rainbow.
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Councilmember Jaxie.
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes.
All right, Bill 2602 has also passed. Moving next into first readings, Bill 2603 is before the council and it concerns Ward 1. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Bros, seconded by Councilmember Clark. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2603.
Bill 2603, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing a boundary adjustment plat that will result in the consolidation of 4 lots of record, which are tracts of land in the west half of Section 7, Township 44 North, Range 3 East of the 5th Principal Meridian, more specifically located on the south side of Melrose Road, west of Austin Fort Road, and hereafter be known as the Lot Consolidation Plat in the west half of Section 7, first reading.
Thank you. Joe Vinich, do you have anything further to mention in addition to the information provided to the council relative to Bill 2603? I know we had a request for second reading, and so one thing I'm sure we would all want to know from you is whether you have an objection to that.
Mr. Mayor, I have no objection to a second reading. In this particular case, the consolidation plat addresses 2 lots that are non-conforming in nature, and will make them part of a single tract of land and eliminate that nonconformity from this particular area.
Okay.
And just to kind of give you an idea, this is the location. As you can see, it's almost at the Franklin County line. And then with Mr. Jacquin's assistant, we can go to the plat. Oh, thank you. And again, the department offers no objection. Thank you. And I'm available for any questions as well.
Okay. Any questions for Joe? Joe, just out of curiosity, how did these 2 end up being approved in a non-conforming law?
Mr. Mayor, the best I can offer you is prior to the city of Wildwood, and particularly in the years of the 1970s and the early 1980s, oftentimes divisions of lots, the creation of lots was done by just deed and exhibit, and oftentimes not submitted to St. Louis County, the Department of Planning, or the County Council, and ultimately recorded and somehow ended up being shown. There's also just as a footnote, years ago, state statute, which I believe still does, allow 10-acre tracts to be created by deed alone. And so that's why oftentimes you see 10-acre tracts with not good access. So it was kind of the Wild West for a while, but hopefully we're bringing some, what I would consider reasonableness to it. As you can see in that upper right corner, there's a tract of land there, parcel 3, that's just about 760 square feet in size in a 3-acre area. So not that people were being malicious or anything, it's just how things used to be done.
Well, those of us in Ward 6 know that it's the Wild West, but we are never malicious, so that's fine. All right. There was a request for second reading, and there's no objection from the department. Would anyone on the council like to make a motion for second reading? Made by Councilmember Galani, second by Councilmember Clark. This is a 2/3 vote, and we'll just do we'll do a voice vote if it appears that it's not, that if it appears close, we'll do a roll call. So all in favor of the motion for second reading, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So I think we clearly have a 2/3. Approval for second reading at this meeting. Ms. Eldridge, would you please read Bill 2603?
Bill 2603, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing a boundary adjustment plat that will result in the consolidation of 4 lots of record, which are tracts of land in the west half of Section 7, Township 44 North, Range 3 East of the 5th Principal Meridian, more specifically located on the south side of Melrose Road, west of Austin Fort Road, and hereafter be known as the lot consolidation plat in the west half of Section 7, second reading.
Thank you. Any discussion by any member of the council or any questions? All right, seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2603.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember
Yes
Brose, Councilmember Brose,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy.
Yes.
Was that a yes?
Yes. Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo.
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
I vote yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Jaxi,
I also vote yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2603 has passed. Last of our first readings is Bill 2604. This concerns all wards and it relates to the appointment of Mr. Steve Cross as our city administrator. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill made by Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember Galani? All in favor of the motion for first reading, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Me as Councilmember McCune. Any abstentions? The motion passes. Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2604.
Bill 2604, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, appointing Stephen V. Cross to the office of City Administrator, establishing the compensation of the City Administrator, and authorizing the mayor to execute an employment agreement. First reading.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Garitano.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I'd like to make a motion that we do a second reading for tonight.
Okay, we have a motion for second reading. Is there a second to the motion for second reading made by Councilmember Flasher? And as I just mentioned, it will take a 2/3 vote for that. And we'll do a voice vote unless it appears close. All in favor of the motion for second reading, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Councilmember McCune is opposed. Any abstentions? You did read it the first time, is that correct? Yeah, okay. Please read, Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2604 a second time.
Bill 2604, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, appointing Stephen V. Cross to the office of City Administrator, establishing the compensation of the City Administrator, and authorizing the mayor to execute an employment agreement. Second reading.
Thank you. Does any member of the council have any questions or comments relative to Bill 2604? Councilmember McCune?
I'm sorry, I wasn't part of the closed session, so if somebody can just help fill in some gaps and some questions I have. Why wasn't this posted for other members in Wildwood to apply for the job? That's my first question, and I have others. Can somebody answer that?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I think, so this originated from the Admin Public Works Committee. Yeah. And the council on its own volition, this body this evening, for example, or any committee of the council has the right to make a recommendation to the council as to the city administrator. And to my knowledge, there is no requirement that it by law has to be posted. Is that correct? So I think that's the answer.
I was just wondering why. So I just want to comment on the reason why I said no, and I'm opposed to the appointment. Before, when you were city appointed the interim, we had a falling out, Mr. Cross, and I've tried my best to extend an olive branch and try to have amends. And you were unprofessional with me before. So I'm talking about the position and being professional. That was done to me personally as a citizen. And now just 2 weeks ago, you got in my face, you raised your voice, and you were very rude and condescending to me here in council chambers. I am a council member and I'm a member and I am a woman. And I think that a man, and for the position that you're in and that you're going to, for being professional, I don't think that anybody else in hiring somebody should look at that conduct. I think that there's other citizens that are upset too for the way that you speak to them or you respond to them as well. So the council needs to hear the comments of what the community's interactions are with Mr. Cross. I can speak personally that it hasn't been pleasant. And I have tried every which way to be nice, to work with you, but somehow you become very rude. So for that reason, I am not in agreement. And I think that this council should make sure that city staff feels the same way, and also the citizens, because he's going to run our city. So I think if you guys don't know that answer and just don't take it on my own accord, maybe outreach to other people and see how his interactions have been. So I can't support this for that reason alone.
Thank you. Does any other member of the council wish to speak? Councilmember Garetano. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Garetano.
Yes, Mayor, members of the council, just want to state my full support for Steve Cross for city administrator. Steve has served as the city's treasurer for about the last 17 or 18 years. He's also been bonded by the city during that time period and has stepped in to serve as our interim city administrator not once but twice. Most recently serving in this capacity since September of last year when the city needed help filling the role temporarily. Prior to that, he also filled the role for 8 months prior to the appointment of the previous city administrator. So just my support is for Steve. He's been doing a great job, very responsive for the city and the needs of our residents. And believe, given his tenure here at the city for 18 years or so, serving as treasurer, placing that tremendous trust, overseeing our financials, that he's well positioned for that. And as well, he brings 48 years of professional experience serving as a chief financial officer and chief administrative officer. So a lot of good experience and connections in the community. So I am here to comment and support Steve. Thank you.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, small miracles. I would just like to speak about my experience with Mr. Cross. I have had nothing but positive interactions and a professional experience. I also say that as a female. My residents have appreciated his response. I've had one resident that was unhappy about an outcome, but not a personal interaction, so to speak. And it is so refreshing to have my calls returned and my emails answered at all, especially in a prompt manner, and for my residents to have someone available to talk to that is running the city. And I do notice and appreciate the follow-up on resident issues. It's either it's rain or pour. When it rains, it pours, rather, with issues. I either tend to have nothing going on or about 10 resident problems at once, and they all seem to be handled. So I do appreciate that, and I say that as a female as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Dodwell.
I too want to echo my support for our new city administrator, Stephen Cross. Having been involved in prior city administrator interviews, etc., having worked with Mr. Cross, having talked one-on-one with Mr. Cross, having talked with my residents in Ward 4, not every one of them, but receiving good feedback from my residents for Mr. Cross. I don't see any reason we should not facilitate ourselves to the business experience that he brings here, which I think provides the city with a stronger guidance for our staff and a stronger guidance for council as we look at numbers and costs, etc. We have a man who knows how to work towards a balanced budget, even when he's got 18 of us sitting here in the room arguing specific topics. And he has handled our budgeting process for so long that I think it would be incumbent upon us, with all of those feature sets, not to approve him this evening and not to cause the city to expend additional funds, as we had previously, to go out and find an individual that perhaps doesn't meet all those qualifications. So thank you for your vote for Mr. Cross this evening.
Thank you. And I don't see any other council members. I'm sorry, Councilmember Clark.
Yes, I want to support Mr. I just want to echo what everybody was saying, Mr. Cross, and support in, I appreciate just in the times that we've talked together, and I have been very annoying, I'm sure. So I appreciate your patience and not treating me as a female. I worked for many, many years as a chemist and an engineer in what's considered a man's world. And it's always a struggle to get to the point where you're treated as an engineer and not as a woman engineer. And I appreciate you portraying that. I just want to know, I want everyone to appreciate your knowledge and experience and your ability to implement the latest in like Six Sigma and lean activities to keep us going forward in a positive way. And I do appreciate that very much.
Thank you. I don't see any other council members wishing to speak. So before the vote's taken, I would just like to mention one thing. I'm very reticent to ever get involved in he said, she said things. However, I was actually at this very spot with respect to the matter that you raised, Councilmember McCune. And the reason I'm speaking to it is because when allegations, when it's dealing with someone's reputation and they're not in a position such as this meeting that probably wouldn't be appropriate to defend themselves, sometimes people can perceive allegations as carrying the seeds of truth when in fact they don't. Had I felt that either the city attorney or Mr. Cross were out of line, I would have done something. I didn't for that reason. And if it's any consolation, and again, this is subjective, and I'm not saying you didn't perceive it in the way you did, I'll take you at your word for that. What I will say, if it's any consolation in addition to that, is that in the course of my many months, and in the case of the city attorney, years of working with both of them on various issues, they speak to me in the same way, and in many instances have probably spoken to me in a much more firm way. And I've actually appreciated the fact that they do that when they do. So I just want to mention that was not my perception of it. You may, Councilmember McCune.
Thank you. Just to clarify, I appreciate that you spoke on that matter, and I know that you were sitting there, but I think that the comment that was made before we went into session today and your snide comment about when I was complimenting Miss Julian, Mr. Rambo came over here, was very concerned of how you just spoke to me. So for you to defend me in something that where somebody's talking down to me, you and I don't get along. And it's obvious in the way that you treated me, and everybody here can say it. I have text messages from Councilmember Flasher talking about your conduct with me and other council members, how they see how you treat me. Everybody has seen it. So for you to say that you're going to defend me, I don't think that that's going to even happen. So it's kind of comical that you said that. So again, you were ignorant with me today already. So in this instance, yes, it is the perceivers. It's my opinion. I can let both of them comment on it, but they did raise their voice. I didn't ask for it. So are they discriminating against me? Or are they pointing me out? Are they picking on me? Is it anti-harassment? I don't know. But I don't like it. I said that they were out of line, and I said I didn't like the behavior. That's the second time that Mr. Cross has done and acted in that way. The second. So it's not the first, it's the second. And the first one, he did apologize. So I'm asking him to do that again. But obviously, I'm not going to get that. So that's my question, and that's my problem. So I appreciate your ability to say that you would, address the situation when if you felt it was out of line, but you've never defended me. So I don't think that you would do it now. So thank you.
Because I didn't see it out of line. Councilmember Flasher.
What I was going to say isn't worth it, so I'm just going to.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2604.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes, yes, and yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
No.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
I vote yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Absolutely, yes.
Councilmember Jaxi,
I also vote yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell, Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Bill 2604 has passed. Congratulations, Mr. Cross. All right, moving to resolutions, we have one. Resolution 2021-11 is before the council, and it concerns wards 1, 5, and 8. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2021-11? Made by Councilmember McCutcheon, second by Councilmember Clark. Ms. Foster, please read Resolution 2021-11.
Resolution 2021-11, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the city administrator to execute a contract with Dr. Tom Thunder Acoustic Associates LTD for the provision of professional services in support of the Planning and Parks Committee's efforts to better understand and potentially manage traffic noise along major arterial corridors within this community.
Okay, thank you. Joe, do you want to speak to this?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just very briefly. The Planning and Parks Committee has been considering a range of changes to the noise code. As they were considering this range of changes, they became aware of concerns expressed by residents and others about the noise along certain major arterial transportation corridors in the city. Ultimately, the committee directed the Department of Planning and Parks to solicit a proposal from Dr. Tom Thunder, who has been working on the aquaculture operation out on Wild Horse Creek Road. Dr. Thunder provided the proposal. The proposal is for $12,500, and tonight the department is here to answer any questions in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Are there any questions for Joe or any comments on Resolution 2021-11? Seeing no comments, all in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 2021-11, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Who was that? Councilmember Farmer, were you opposing or were you supporting?
I was supporting.
Okay, good. You came in a little late there on the I don't think you did, but we heard you late. Let's put it that way. So just want to make sure we get you recorded properly. Okay, Resolution 2021-11 has passed.
Mayor, I wanted to abstain.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I not ask for extension? Okay, my apology. Any abstentions? Councilmember McCune, any other abstentions? All right. Moving next to the consent agenda, we have two items. The first is approval of expenditure. The second is the reappointment of Dan Roten from Ward 2 to the Historic Preservation Commission. As I've explained previously, unless any member of the council has an issue with either of these, one vote will take care of both. So is there any issue with voting on both of these collectively? Councilmember McCune?
Just a procedure question. If I vote no for the expenditures, do you have to divide them out?
I do.
I'm going to vote no, so.
Okay, we'll take them one at a time. So approval of expenditures, is there a motion to adopt the expenditures as presented? Or any questions on those? Made by Councilmember Galani, seconded by Councilmember Flasher. Any discussion on the motion to approve the expenditures? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion to approve the expenditures, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Councilmember McCune is opposed. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Moving next to the appointment of Mr. Roten. If you have any questions on his reappointment, I'm happy to answer those. He's done a great job, loves doing it, and wants to continue. If you don't have any questions, I will entertain a motion to approve Mr. Roten, made by Councilmember Eden, seconded by Councilmember Bartoni. Any discussion on the motion to approve the appointment? Councilmember Bartoni.
I don't know. I had a miscellaneous item, so my hand's probably just up a little quick.
Oh, that's okay. Councilmember Edens.
Just a thank you to Mr. Routen for his years of service, and we're excited he still wants to continue on HBC.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. Councilmember Remy.
Just a point of clarification. This has nothing to do with this gentleman. Just how long has he served on this committee thus far?
One term, I believe. Yeah, one term.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, there is no term limit. I'm rigid with the term limit. So if you have someone before you, they're not term limited. So
perfect. Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. All right. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the motion of the reappointment of Mr. Routen to our Historic Preservation Commission, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. That takes us to miscellaneous. Councilmember Dodwell.
I just hope this will be a quick question and can be answered at the next council meeting if possible. I just want to get a status report on the Strecker Road sidewalk improvements, when the phase 2 is going to be completed and when we're going to start work on it. I know it's in this year's budget, but I want to make sure that things are moving forward on it.
I can tell you personally that they are. I actually just saw some emails and had a conversation with Rick Brown about this about 72 hours ago. So I know he's working on it diligently, and we should have a report without objection. Rick, if you can just do an informational report for the work session for the next meeting to let everyone know where that project is, we would appreciate that.
Thank you, Mayor.
Be fine.
Councilmember Nyan.
I just had a general question as well. Have we heard anything else about when the courts will be opening? It seems like it's opening and restrictions are lessening.
Yeah. We have such opportune questions this evening. So I just got an email from our judge that indicates the presiding judge.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, she didn't have her microphone on. We couldn't hear the question. Can you repeat it, please?
Okay. Her question was if we had any idea as to when our courts, municipal courts, would be opening.
Thank you.
And as it just so happens, I got an email earlier this evening from our judge who indicated, because I've been inquiring of the same thing for a number of different reasons. And he indicated that the presiding St. Louis County judge who's handling this, his name is Judge Burton, and I'll just read this here, that the court hopes to move to phase 2. There are 3 phases, I believe, and 3 is fully open. Is that correct? Yeah, 0, 1, 2, 3. We're still in 1. In the very, quote, very near future. But the 21st Judicial Circuit, which we are in, will remain in operating phase 1 as of right now. So, so I think that it's looking hopefully like we'll get to phase 2 soon. I know that other counties, such as St. Charles County, have been in phase 3 for quite some time, but I'm not aware of the considerations the judge is making relative to that, but that's the answer. So, all right. Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I speak for what I want to talk about, to answer Councilmember Nyan, we are still in phase 1, and according to Judge Brunk, we need to go for 2 weeks without any kind of an effect in Clayton. He calls it stub our toe. So, and there is something that is holding Judge Burton back. So we have to go 2 weeks clean and nothing, no cases, no testing positive. Then we would move to phase 2. Then we would need to go another 2 weeks to move then into the final phase 3, in which case then we would be able to have in-person appearances. So we have a ways to go yet, it appears. What I wanted to say to Mr. Mayor and to council members, I'm absolutely humbled by the trust that you've placed in me tonight. That's all I can say. I mean, I'm going to try not to get emotional, actually. I promise and I commit to you that I will do my utmost best to meet the trust that you've placed in me and do everything I can to serve you as the city administrator to the best of my abilities. Any feedback or comments, help that you can give to me, I'm more than happy to receive that, but I will do everything I can in my power to prove that the trust that you put in me to meet your expectations. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Remy.
Yes, Mayor. Since next meeting, we'll be talking about in the work session the erosion and the erosion task force will have MSD. I'd like to make sure that we have MSD back on the docket for the next meeting. We had a lot of questions for them among all the council members last time, and I just want to make sure that we can address them directly post our erosion meeting. I think there's different indications for having them at that meeting as well as having them in front of council, and I want to make sure we get that back next meeting.
Okay, we can do that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, we can do that. Council Member Bartoni.
Thank you. And what I wanted to say was the same thing that Katie had mentioned earlier. If we could put the Strecker road, sidewalk on the work agenda for next meeting. That would be very beneficial to not only us, but probably to our residents as well. Now that the weather has been nice for a few weeks, I am getting questions every day about it. And Rick, if the one thing, I know you had mentioned that the last time we were waiting on a phase 2 or whatever, the one thing that the residents like is dates. So if we could get some sort of information, like, you know, we've got it scheduled, we're talking to a company that's going to do it. I mean, just the more details, the better would be appreciated.
Yep, he'll include that in the report that he's going to put under information for the next meeting. Councilmember Bertolino.
Yeah, if I may, and maybe this is to Joe more than anyone else. I noticed on the internet access letter that you sent out, there was a reference to Starlink. And your comments I thought were appropriate, but it kind of sounded like, yeah, that could be great, but it's too soon to tell. I have had, believe it or not, a citizen text me this last week and say, hey, you've got Starlink on there. I think it's a wonderful idea, so on and so forth. Can you give me kind of a status update so I can go back to that particular individual and say, what are we going to do with this if Tesla can put some more rockets up in the satellites? Are we going to have that system available?
Actually, the full deployment of the satellite system to bring it to what I would consider its optimum performance is many, many, many years away. It's just another option for some that may not have any options at all. It is in beta testing. The beta is the reviews have been mixed regarding the beta testing, but it's just something that we research, we try to find other options because some of the things that have been traditionally provided aren't being provided now. And so I would call it not the best option, certainly by any stretch of the imagination, but one, if someone wants to try it, may be worth a try.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yeah, I'd also appreciate if there would be an update on the Birch Forest turnaround on next work session.
Okay. Is there any objection to having a informational report at the next council meeting in work session, on the work session agenda on that item? Seeing no objection, it'll be done. Councilmember Rambo.
I was hoping to shed some further light on.
You have your microphone on?
It should be on. It's glowing red.
Okay, so it's on then. I'm sorry.
Just real quickly to add to what Joe said, I am so not a fan of Starlink. I think it's an abomination for many reasons, from the aesthetic to the environmental to the financial to the social justice to the technical. As a matter of fact, they are putting up about 20 satellites every 2 weeks. They're sort of cookie cutter. They're expecting some failures and so forth. In 2025, they expect to be able to provide 50,000 contemporaneous sessions in all of North America at 100 megabits up and down, which means just a few thousand per state if you ignore Canada and Mexico, which is literally nothing. And they're currently calling their beta test the better than nothing beta, which is about what everybody is getting. The reviews are decidedly mixed. I sure wouldn't try to dissuade anyone from jumping on it if it solves their problem, but it's not going to be a horse that we can ride. I've tried to make that comment before. I would say tell people that they're on their own, but it's not going to solve Wildwood's problem, period.
Councilmember Remy, I saw your raise hand feature is up still. Did you want to speak again, or is that from before?
It's just my last thing I want to just say on just behalf of Ward 3. Over the last couple of days, we've had some really nice comments from or questions from our Ward 3 citizens. And I just want to give a kudos to Mr. Brown and Mr. Vunich. They responded within hours to our citizens, and I'm most appreciative of that. I think our citizens are happy with certainly getting such a quick turnaround. And for that, I want to just thank them.
Thank you. Councilmember Edens.
Yes, on a concerning but lighter note, another council member just shared with me a question she got from a resident asking if I was drinking during the meeting. It's an unfortunate glass choice, but this is a Coca-Cola with an ice cube. You can see the ice in it. I didn't have any other glasses clean, so I would like to set the record straight. And no offense to Pepsi Company, it happens to be a Coke. So I will do more dishes next time.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, one thing I wanted to just mention as a point of personal privilege, thanks to Julian for his work in Steve and getting us back on the live stream with relatively few hookups once it got going. And we really appreciate that. And it worked well, as long as the mayor can remember to be quiet and let people answer on a delayed basis on Zoom. So, all right. Thank you so much for that and all the work that you do. With that, if no one has anything further, I would ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting of the City Council. Made by Councilmember Galani, seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Non-debatable motion. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? We are adjourned. Thank you and have a great rest of the week.